Okay, so for all of you who are just joining us, we're writers, and I'm running on writer time, a little bit late. Um, so for all of you who are just joining us, we'd like to welcome you to our second San Diego Writers Festival Summer Day. I'm your co-host, Marnie Friedman, and we have such a great lineup for you today. So sit back, grab a bagel and a cup of coffee. Join us for a wonderful day of events that are going to make you laugh and think and hopefully leave you creatively inspired. If you joined us at the first event, welcome back. Welcome. If this is your first event, welcome to the San Diego Writers Festival family. In case you just found us, all of our programs are going to be, let's say you can only join us for part of the day. They're all going to be recorded and you'll be able to catch up on them. And now I'd like to bring in Anastasia.
Hi, I'm your co-host, Anastasia Hipkins. Just a couple of other quick announcements. We want to give the quickest shout out ever to our partners at the Coronado Public Library, Warwick's, to the San Diego Memoir Writers Association for their continued support. And we want to remind you that we're partnering with Feeding San Diego for all of our summer events. Feeding San Diego provides nutritious food to people in need. If you can, please consider making a gift today. There's a link on our Facebook page, and also you'll see it dropped in throughout the day into the Facebook comments. This is our first exciting event, our first exciting panel is Writing the Page-Turning Novel, brought to you by S. Kensington, author of Just Another Girl on the Road, a captivating tale set in the latter years of World War II, in which a young woman demonstrates resilience and finds opportunities for love within the darkness of war and the light of liberation. I first saw this book. It was displayed in a library case at the San Diego Public Library this past January as part of their local author showcase, which was an amazing event. And I have to say, I was standing in the main lobby and I was listening to Judy Reeves, surrounded by local authors. And I was just reminded about how San Diego is home to such a thriving community of creative people, some of whom are on this panel.
Yeah, and they are. I'm so excited, and it's my pleasure to welcome those of you who are on the screen. There's Tammy Greenwood, hello. Neal Griffin, Joey Day, welcome back. See, you can't get away from us, Joe. Once you're
I
part
tried.
of the family,
I tried.
back in.
It didn't work.
No. And our talented moderator, Rich Farrell. Before introducing Rich, I want to remind our audience on Facebook that we want to hear your questions. So enter them in the comment field on Facebook, and we'll get them to Rich and to the panelists. And now I get to introduce Rich. So Rich Farrell is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and MFA in Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. His work, including fiction, memoir, essays, interviews, and book reviews, has appeared in The Forge, Potomac River, Hunger Mountain, New Plains Review, and others. He teaches creative writing at Grossmont College and San Diego Writers, Inc. I'm most excited to let you know that his first novel, woohoo, just came out, The Falling Woman. It was just released by Algonquin Books in like 3 weeks ago, I think he said. Here's a little bit about The Fallen Woman. First, it's just barely believable rumor. One person may have survived the midair explosion of a passenger jet on a cross-country course from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, but soon she becomes a national media sensation when the falling woman, as the press dubs her, is said to have been taken to a Wichita hospital and then to have disappeared without a trace. So just that description, when I looked up some of the reviews, one person said, it's perfectly framed to become a favorite for book clubs and for all readers who relish profound page-turning story with heart, which is just fits right into our wonderful panelists today, who all write page-turning work. So, Rich, I will hand it over to you. Congratulations on your novel.
Thanks, Marnie. Thank you very much. And I am delighted that I don't have to talk about my book today. And I can host 4 other writers and talk about their books and their process. What I'll do is I'll introduce each of the 4 writers, read their short bios, and then my thought is I would just present some questions to the group and give everyone an opportunity to answer. And then we'll do that kind of round robin technique, and then we'll maybe open it up at the end for some questions and answers from from the audience. So let me just start by reading the bios. Tammy Greenwood is an award-winning author of 13 novels, including Keeping Lucy, Rust and Stardust, and Where I Lost Her. She has won 4 San Diego Book Awards, and her novel Bodies of Water was a Lambda Award nominee. She teaches creative writing at San Diego Writers Inc. and online for the Writers Center. She lives in San Diego with her husband and their 2 daughters. And Tammy was my first writing teacher. So Tammy, do you want to just say something real quick? I'll introduce you all and let you say something, and then I'll come back with the questions.
Sure. I'm just so excited to be here. This is so fabulous that this is going on. It was so disappointing when everything started shutting down, and I want to applaud Marnie and Anastasia and just rising to the occasion here. This is incredible. I'm so excited to be on this panel because I have lots of writers that I worked with on this panel in various capacities. And I'm just really, really happy to be here.
Welcome. Our next writer is Neal Griffin. Neal was in his 25th year of police work in California when his debut novel, Benefit of the Doubt, was published by Forge Books. The book immediately hit the LA Times bestseller list, where it stayed for 2 months. The publisher said, do it again, and Neal turned to writing full-time. Neal's 4th novel, The Burden of Truth, will be released by Forge Books in May of 2020. That bio may be a little bit, maybe Neal can correct that for us when he comes in. It tells the tale of Omar Ortega, an 18-year-old Mexican-American who deftly straddles a line between overzealous cops and bad actors in the barrio until his luck runs out. Neal, welcome, and it's nice to meet you.
I guess I got to unmute myself. Well, yes, you're right, Rich. The date is actually this coming Tuesday, but everybody gets a pass on, we'll just call it the COVID pass on dates, right? Because this was supposed to be out months and months ago, and this wasn't exactly the way I'd intended to present The Burden of Truth, but I'll just mirror what Tammy said and really say to Marnie and Anastasia, thank you so much for going the extra effort to keep readers and writers connected. We're used to being alone when we're working, but when we get a chance to talk about our books, I think we all just feed off the energy of an audience. So I look forward to that again. But in the meantime, this is going to work, and it's great to be here today. So thanks so much for the invitation. And yes, hello, teacher Tammy, one of my very first teaching coaches, and she knows Omar as well as I do. So looking forward to talking about it.
Congrats on the book coming out. Too. It's exciting. Joe Ide is of Japanese American descent and grew up in South Central Los Angeles. Joe's favorite books were the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories. The idea that a person could face the world and vanquish his enemies with just his intelligence fascinated him. Joe went on to earn a graduate degree in several careers before writing his debut novel, IQ, inspired by his early experiences and love of Sherlock. Joe lives in Santa Monica, California. Joe, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, back in San Diego. I know that about a third of the audience in San Diego is sketchy, but I'm glad to be back here anyway. I always enjoy this interchange.
Cool. Welcome, Joe. And we are a little sketchy down here. We have a little different lifestyle. And our 4th writer is Robin Rd Carden, and she is a native New Yorker, educated in the New York City public school system, and is the author of Fly Girl, her debut novel, and inspired by her experiences as a professional pilot. Robin holds a BA in journalism and sociology from NYU and a JD from American University. She practiced law for 10 years before becoming disillusioned with her career choice. She always loved airplanes and decided to go flying. I love that line, by the way. Robin flew as a corporate and airline pilot for 12 years, which took her all over the world. She's flown everything from single-engine Cessnas to the Boeing 737. She holds an airline transport pilot certificate with 3 captain qualifications, type ratings, and has a commercial helicopter rating. In her spare time, Robin loves to play tennis and volunteer for the local animal rescue organization. She lives in San Diego, California, with her 3 beloved rescue pets. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you, Marnie, Anastasia, and the rest of the team at San Diego Writers Festival. It's truly a miracle that this festival is moving forward in the way that it is, and I am honored to be a part of it. Rich, thank you for the shout out to my debut novel, Fly Girl. My 2nd novel, Angel Flight, releases in September of this year. And I'm extremely excited about that as well. And I also feel like I have to make one additional comment about the composition of this panel, because like Neal, I am sitting on a panel talking to people about how to write a page-turning novel with a woman who taught me how to do that very thing, Tammy Greenwood, whose intellect and humor and competence has touched so many writers here in San Diego. So thank you, Rich, and thank you, Tammy, if I don't get another chance to say it.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. And what I thought I would do, I'll try to do it this way, and hopefully it makes sense. I don't like to, I teach too much, so I don't want to be the teacher. I'm going to ask a question, and whoever of the four of you wants to sort of take it first and go with it, and then we'll just kind of, allow that, maybe we'll allow that process to work this way. I'll just keep an eye on the clock. The first question opens with a quote by a Canadian writer who I admire quite a bit, named Stephen Heighton. And Stephen says, this is the quote: "Interest is never enough. If it doesn't haunt you, you'll never write it well. What haunts and obsesses you into writing may, with luck and labor, interest your readers. What merely interests you is sure to bore them." So my first question for the panel is, if you could talk about, as a writer, what haunts you, and that could be with a specific book or maybe just anything in general. What haunts you? If you agree or disagree with Stephen's quote.
I'm going to take that one because what haunted me ultimately ended up being my first novel, Fly Girl, was an experience that I'd had as a pilot. And it stuck with me for years and years and years. It was a really awful experience, and I wanted to write about it. And then I realized, like you just said, Rich, and like the quote indicates, nobody was going to be really interested in that story. So I had to find a way to present the story so that people would actually want to read it and that they would keep turning pages. And the way that I did that was by using multiple third-person points of view in writing the story. In other words, telling the story chapter after chapter from the perspectives of other characters who themselves were haunted by similar situations.
I guess I had kind of a similar experience. I wrote a book recently. It's called, well, it's The Burden of Truth, the one that Rich mentioned. It's funny because all the books I've written have been pure fiction based in a small town in Wisconsin that I just made up. But now that I'm retired and I feel a little more comfortable writing about maybe a little closer to home, I based this book actually in here in San Diego. It's based in Vista. And it's based on the really world experiences of a young man like Omar Ortega. And haunted is a strong word, but certainly what has stuck with me is the young men I met during the time that I was in police work that are walking what I call that fine line, that middle lane of barrio street justice, if you will. On one side are the cops that they have to kind of contend with every day, who see them in a certain way. And right in that other lane are the gangsters who think a kid like Omar should have already jumped in, be paying the tax and putting in the work. But Omar is just a really good kid. And he's just trying to walk that very fine line. And I met a lot of young men like Omar, haunted to a degree, because I know that because of one night, because of one position they were put in, which was really no fault of their own, their lives took really tragic turns. So I try to tell that story in the Burden of Truth. And yeah, I would say that I was really pushed by that experience, more than haunted, but I was pushed. But I was certainly motivated to get that story. I look forward to telling a lot of people about Omar.
I can't say that I'm haunted, but what I try and focus on is the emotion of the scene. I think that accounts for the ups and downs on a roller coaster, the ups and downs of the characters and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. I think it's easier to relate to a character when you understand their own personal stakes above and beyond money or power or whatever it is, because you can relate to that need, that human need, whatever it is. And and you can invest in that character, whether they're a good guy or a bad guy. And I think this is part of that page turning thing. I mean, who really cares about a car chase unless you're invested in the people in the car? And that's my focus. I try and keep my eye on that ball.
I would agree that I think with the quote anyway, that, you know, all good writing comes from obsession and an inability to let go of an idea or an image or a question. And so every book that I've written has started with that. I always describe it to my students as sort of this white hot thing that won't leave you alone. And, you know, I have in my office here a door, and I write down my ideas and then I tape them up on the door, and there's probably 15 novels worth of ideas up there that are all these little hot embers, you know, that are things that I've been thinking about. Some of them, you know, for a couple months, some of them for a decade. And, you know, some of them will turn into, you know, will become fire and, you know, and turn into something that consumes me. But I'm not always right. You know, I think sometimes you think it's love and with an idea, and it's just infatuation, and it fizzles quickly. And other times it's enough to sustain, because writing a novel is not like, it's not quick. It takes a long, long time. And so you have to be consumed. You have to be obsessed. You have to be completely impassioned when you're setting out to write a novel, because otherwise it won't carry you through the process. You have to be, you know, completely obsessed in order to make it to the end, and then to revise and to do all those things that you have to do to get through to, you know, a complete and finished novel.
I'll kind of do like a press conference. I'll do a follow-up question. Those are great answers, by the way, all four of them. If you could maybe take that same question and turn it around a little bit into your habits, because a lot of times we don't talk about what intense writers have to be to write well. Maybe if you could talk about the experience as a reader as well. In other words, what sustains you in a book? What sustains you to keep going as a reader? What makes you turn a page as a reader? Just sort of a open-ended question.
Character. If I can't invest in that character, I give up pretty quickly. I want to know somebody whose world is different from mine, and whose actions in that world would be different from mine. There's a symbiosis between character and forward movement, because that character is going to behave differently from all the other characters in the books. And it's one of the things that drives you forward, is to see what he or she is going to do. What kind of decision are they going to make? But that presumes you know that character. It presumes that the writer knows enough about the internal world of that character, so the writer can honestly write about that character, what he or she is going to do or say. And like all things, it in a novel, it really relates to character.
I agree with what Joe's saying, and I think I would rate character first as well, but then right behind it, I would say the world you put that character in, the setting that you create, the world that you build, that person belongs in. And I think that's what really draws me in very quickly is, as Joe said, is someone that I'm really interested in the world they come from and the person they are. So when I find myself going back, polishing pages and trying to get ready for presentation, whatever it might be, I think the things I'm most concentrating on are character and a really a setting that people can feel, a setting that people can really put themselves in, a world that they can exist in while they're reading those pages and escape in, I guess. So I'd say character and setting.
You know, I agree with both Neal and Joe. Character and story world are extremely important. But Rich, as soon as you asked the follow-up question, I wrote down 2 words: conflict and inconsistencies. You know, you're going along, your character's going along thinking things are a certain way, they learn that things aren't, or maybe they don't know exactly what's happening in the background. And that's the type of thing that keeps me turning pages. But I also want to hit on the point that I learned how to write in that style, in a page-turning style, by reading other books that are written that way. And, you know, I like to say, steal the best from everyone, short of plagiarism. And just learning the technique. And to be frank, if you want to learn how to write a page-turning novel, read anything that Tammy Greenwood has published. She writes the types of books that you carry around with you all day long, and you leave them in the bathroom, and you leave them in the kitchen, and you know, you spill coffee all over them, because you just can't wait to see what happens next. And in addition to learning from Tammy in a classroom, I've learned a great deal from her by reading all of her novels.
Geez, I feel like I'm getting so much flattering kindness here. It's you know, from brilliant writers. So thank you. I'm going to argue that in addition to all these other things is that it depends on the kind of book for me. So some books I will read just because I want to know what's going to happen next, or because I'm really in love with the character or invested in their lives or their world, or I'm fascinated by a setting. But I can also read a very quiet novel that is beautifully written, and that will keep me turning pages as well. So sometimes prose itself is enough for me. And so as a writer, my aspiration is always to sort of use all those things, you know, to create a beautiful story world that, you know, gives access to the reader to a place they might not otherwise be able to travel, characters that you can empathize with and who have contradictions and all those things, but then written in a voice or in prose that is beautiful. You know, that's sustaining and I think doesn't get enough credit sometimes when we're talking about storytelling, because storytelling and writing are two different things.
Right.
And both of them are critical in maintaining a reader's interest. Not imperative, but, you know, or, you know, not mutually exclusive, but both important.
Tammy led me into my next quote, which maybe we don't have to talk about this, but I'll read the quote anyway. The quote is from a book by William Giraldi, who's a wonderful writer. I got to work with him in a workshop last summer. And the quote he has in this essay is, "The first criterion by which to judge any book must be the sentences. Do they work? Are they imbued with torque and verve? Do they have something lasting to say about a human circus, both shining and absurd?" And so maybe I'll ask the question this way, because we have such an interesting mix of writers on the panel. Language is not one thing, right? I mean, we have crime writers and we have technical writers and we have, you know, science people who with the science background. How do you choose, and how important is choosing language to sustaining a story? I think Tammy already kind of opened the door, so maybe we can just talk about that quickly. But, you know, how important is that sentence to you as a writer?
I'll just pop in and to say it's extremely important, and I wish I could explain how much time I have spent agonizing over a sentence or two, or the choice of one word in a sentence. So I would say it's critical.
I think all of us have a cadence. We can hear the rhythm of our writing, whether we're conscious of it or not. And I tend to choose words that are vivid, but also fit into that cadence. It's a little like music. And so in terms of finding the word and creating the sentence, you're also trying to sound like yourself. You're making all these little decisions like words, again, that no other writer would make, and I'm careful about that. I want my writing to sound like my writing, syllable by syllable, to sound like my writing.
I think cadence is a really great word for it. I think Joe hit it on the head. You can feel it, especially, and everyone should, all the wannabe writers out there, current writers, would tell you, you need to read your work out loud. You need to read it back to yourself. And when you hear that cadence, I think that's a perfect word for it, because it is like music, and it'll just start to flow. And you'll hear when it goes tone deaf as well. by reading it out loud and reading it back to yourself. So
Yeah.
I know when I'm hitting on something when I just say, man, I nailed it, because I'm listening to it come out. I really think Joe hit on the right, the cadence of the music.
What I want to do now, I have a few more questions, but I also, we're getting a lot of questions on the chat. So I want to kind of pull some of those questions in. And the first one we received, which I think is a great, it sounds like we have a lot of writers in the audience. The first question we received is, do you have any tips for entering or exiting a chapter to help it be something that makes the reader want to turn the page? And before I let you answer, I'm going to throw in my quick answer because I have the essay in front of me. There's an incredible essay. It's freely available online by Lee Child. It's called A Simple Way to Create Suspense. And he says, it's a really neat essay. It's only 3 pages long. It was in the New York Times. But he says, in partial answer to this question, he says, because how do you create suspense has the same interrogatory shape as how do you bake a cake? And then he explains what he means by that. But I just wanted to do a shout out to this essay because it's so good. So any thoughts on entering or exiting a chapter? Are there tricks, are there techniques that you have become comfortable with? This is really a plotting or a structural question for you as writers.
For me, it always comes in the revision process because I tend to overwrite, and so my entry into chapters is typically a lot of idling or revving my engine before I get going, and then in the revision process, I tend to lop off where I started because that's not the true start. But I think when I'm writing well or when I'm revising well, imagery is important. Language, again, is important. Voice, but an entryway that is something, to think of every page or every beginning of a chapter as the first page, and if you use like a house metaphors, you have to have an engaging or an interesting front door in order for people to want to go inside, something inviting. And then conversely, I always go too long at the end of my chapters and have to cut off, all the dangling things at the end and then leave it so that there's no option but to move forward. Because those are the books that I love, that where you want to keep reading, right? And if you tidy everything up at the end of the chapter, there's no reason to continue on.
I think a lot of writers would tell you today that the formula is a really short chapter, 2 pages, 100 chapters in your book. And, I'm pretty familiar with all the writers on the panel. I don't think any of us have bought into that completely. You will occasionally have a short chapter, but I've got plenty of chapters that run 5 or 6 pages, and I think they're pretty captivating. But the main thing is, I think, like Tammy was saying, each chapter has to be kind of its own story. It has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle, and it has to have an end. And of course, that end should be a crescendo that makes people say, "Okay, I'm gonna read one more chapter tonight." We've all been there. Now, like I said, it's a little bit of a new trick to just make that a page and a half long. But I think you can write a good, solid, captivating scene that's in depth and has a lot of action, and then end it on the kind of note that makes people say, gee, what's going to happen next? And they just can't let it go.
I totally agree with you, Neal, with everything that you've said. And I will also add that I naturally write short chapters. And I always think of each chapter as a little novel in and of itself that, starts out, something happens, we get to a big conflict, and we end with some indecision or some wrong thinking. A character thinks something is happening, they want to move forward in a direction that is totally wrong. So I would add that to your comment, but I agree with everything you said.
I try and use discrepancy. I mean, for example, you have this perfect ranch house in suburbia, classic, Volvo in the driveway, manicured lawn, and then there's a steel door. And so these two things are sort of jarring, and I'm hoping that at least creates intrigue, curiosity. And it creates the question, who needs a door like that? Who lives behind that door? And if it were me, I like to put a little cliffhanger at the end of a chapter. So that chapter would end when the door opens. And those are the ways, most common way I get in and out of a scene.
Thanks. We have a bunch of good questions coming in now, so I'm going to try and combine some of them just for the sake of time. Someone asked if Tammy teaches novel writing. Yes, she does. I'll answer that one for Tammy. She's a great teacher. So another question on surprise or mystery. Question comes in from Libby Knapp. She says, how do you create surprise or mystery in your stories? And I think one of the things that strikes me about that question is the idea of if there's no surprise for the writer, there's certainly no surprise for the reader. And that's already been mentioned a little bit. I think Joe mentioned that earlier on. But can you think about, like, you know, in terms of creating or crafting these characters with the problems they have and the decisions they have to make? Steve Allman, another writing teacher of mine, once said, writers are decision makers. I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it. I never heard someone put it that way before. We're making decisions all the time. What we're doing, right, is we're limiting the decisions that the characters can make. We're putting them in the horns of a dilemma, but we can't let them do everything. So how do you find surprises in your writing? And maybe it's kind of a little bit woo-woo, but maybe we could talk about that, you know, that experience of surprising yourself or your character surprising you as you write.
I want to give some terrible advice that will cause you much grief and heartache. And that's to not know everything, to not outline necessarily in any sort of detailed way. I just finished writing a 496 page book, and I didn't know who had done it until about 470 pages. And I think that there is sort of that, you know, it's Robert Frost, right, that said that no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. You know, because if you know too much, then it becomes a task of sort of reverse engineering. And whereas if you're writing without the knowledge of what the twists and turns are, then there's going to be simultaneous discovery. Your discovery as the writer and your discovery as the reader, or your reader's discovery. It's horrible and hard, but it's the only way that I found to really create an authentic sense of surprise and also to keep myself engaged as a reader, as a writer, that I'm continuing to write so that I can find out. Whereas if I know everything, then it's kind of like, you know, what's the point? What's the point? You know, there's joy and pleasure in writing that is similar to joy and pleasure of reading. And that's that element of discovery.
I'll bet everybody has that moment, though. It's funny when your character surprises you, when it happens to me a lot just before I go to bed. It has woken me up in the middle of the night. It's happened at the dinner table, and you literally have to run to write it down. And it's a great feeling to be surprised by something your character suddenly decided to do. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but until you're ready to accept your characters as more than just imaginary friends, that they actually occupy your world, you're gonna get stuck. So when your characters can suddenly tap you on the shoulder and tell you something you're going to do. And then the really neat part is to write that down and share it with the reader. So yeah, we've all been surprised by our characters. And I think that's just a sign that you're really onto something. You had a great story working and just, you know, go with that. Sometimes you write yourself right into a cul-de-sac, you got to back out. But most of the time, that's a good sign when your characters really surprise you.
I think it's the character doing something that is within character, but still surprising. That was that movie Jackie Brown, where De Niro and Sam Jackson are pulling off this scam in a mall. Bridget Fonda, Jackson's girlfriend, gets in the way. So De Niro's dragging her out of the mall. He's pulling her through a parking lot, and she's going, no, 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 leave me alone, get off me, get off me, get off me. De Niro's saying, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. And this back and forth just goes on, and then De Niro shoots her. That's totally within character. Totally within character. Man, you didn't see that coming. And then Sam Jackson and De Niro are arguing about this in the car, and Sam Jackson shoots De Niro. Those are the kinds of things that I try to find. You know, I'm not always successful, but in principle, those are the kinds of things I look for.
Tammy didn't teach me this, but the line, when in doubt, kill a character.
When I know I've got it and I realize I'm dating myself here, I grew up watching soap operas on my grandmother's lap. All My Children, General Hospital, The Edge of Night. And at the end of a scene, you know, the characters are going along. It's 2 PM. They're all wearing evening gowns and drinking champagne. And at the end of the scene, you know, Roger says to Fiona, oh, by the way, you know, I'm not in love with you anymore. I'm dating Felicia and she's pregnant. And then you hear music go, ah. And that, if I hear that music in my head, I don't know if this is particularly helpful, then I know I've got it.
All right, let's go to, these are great. I didn't know how many questions we have. So I'm going to just kind of keep, they kind of are following a theme. So I'm going to kind of keep working them. This one was directed towards Neal, but I think we can, you know, the panel can talk about this as well. It says, how do you go about, so let Neal take it first maybe, but then everyone else can jump in. Because you mentioned world building. How do you go about world building when you start a book? You mentioned this book is in a new location for you. You know, what's that process like for you, for all of us as writers?
Well, that's a great question. And in the past, it's been Midwestern noir set in a fictional town called Newburgh, Wisconsin. So there really was a great deal of world building. But I'll just go ahead and say my most recent experience is a true to life novel that involves the San Diego Sheriff's Office with the lead protagonist and a young man who lives in Vista. So that was a lot of fun because that was just, I spent a lot of time driving around Vista. I spent a lot of time sitting in McDonald's in Vista and just taking it in. It was an entirely different experience because it wasn't world building. I was just world creating and observing. And so it's two different things. And I'll let someone else deal with the actual world building. But in this case, with a true to life fiction novel, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoy the fact that it represents a real community, a real organization. Of course, the action is fictitious, the characters are fictitious, but it was a different way of world building, and I really enjoyed the experience. First time I've done it. First fiction true to life novel that I've written.
I think world building and setting are obviously completely connected, right? And I've written books that are set where I grew up in Vermont, and those books I don't even think about the setting because it's so much a part of who I am. It's just organic to me. But I've also written books in places that I've never been, and that's just artifice. That's just coming up with using your imagination and Google Earth, you know, and if it's a historical era, you know, it's research and imagination. Travel if you're able. I'm often not able because I have kids, and so a lot of it is just really rendering a place in a way that calls upon your experience of places that might be similar. But I feel like it's two different activities for me, because when I set a book in Vermont, the setting is so embedded that I don't even think about it. But anywhere else, I have to be really, I have to be more meticulous. And I feel always a little bit like I'm cheating, you know, about writing a place that I'm not as familiar with, but it's possible.
Tammy has touched on, and Neal has as well, you know, a different concept as opposed to world building. There's also world remembering. I set my novels in the cockpit of airplanes, in airplane hangars, at airports, at executive terminals all over the world. Just about every single place I write about is a place that I have been. But I will also share, being incredibly type A, that on those occasions when I wish to include an area where I have not been and try and authentically represent that area, I do a tremendous amount of research. I will call local newspapers. I will call local community organizations. For my latest novel, Angel Flight, I spent a very good amount of time on the phone with the Bangor, Maine Police Department, trying to determine exactly what their procedures would be in a certain circumstance. And it occurred to me when I was doing this that no reader would likely ever know or care. But again, type A. I knew and I cared.
I think setting to a large degree defines character, whether it's the hood or Malibu. You can see where that character grew up, who the people are in his or her life, and all the things that build you as a person, your economic status and the ambitions of your parents and all those kinds of things you can see in the setting itself. And so again, it's one of those things that makes it easier to understand a character.
I just would close this because it's a great topic. I think all of us love to talk about character building and world building. It's funny because now I'm writing a prequel to my first novel, Benefit of the Doubt. And there was a very old character in that book who is barely explored because as the book opens, he's an elderly gentleman, a retired cop who's had a stroke. So he has very little to say about anything. But the book's a prequel to his work in the 1970s as a police officer. So he started off in the Milwaukee Police Department in 1970. So I've been fortunate enough, I just reached out. And what I wound up with was a gentleman who has retired from the Milwaukee Police Department, whose rookie year was 1970. And I know if it wasn't for this damn COVID, he would have already had me out there to Milwaukee to tour the department and to meet all his old friends that used to walk the streets in 1970. But I'm just having a great time picking his brain and trying to really create this young rookie cop in 1970 Wisconsin when the Vietnam War was everywhere and protests and all that sort of thing. So it's been a lot of fun. World building is a great time. Spend time with it. That's time very well invested. It's really it's one of the things that's really gonna grab a hold of your reader.
Okay, great. A question came up. This is a tough one. I'm going to warn you all in advance. This is a tough one. Question came up. It was directed towards Joe, but again, I think it's relevant to everyone because you're all doing this when you write books and when you write characters, because it's coming through the writer. You know, the sense of whatever we're trying to say is certainly coming through us. So the question is, how do you, I can't even believe I'm going to read this. This is a really hard question. How do you know when you've found your voice, when you sound like yourself as a writer?
I think it has a lot to do with rewriting. All of us rewrite multiple times and throw away hundreds of pages. And when you're rewriting, you're making 1,000 tiny little decisions. You know, which word, which sentence, which goes where. And as you're doing these rewrites, you literally do this thousands of times, not consciously, but that's the process. And I think voice is cumulative. That is, all those little decisions are your voice because nobody else would make the same decisions. It's like you have 1 million words and you only get to choose 10,000. It assumes, though, that you asked all those questions. Well, I think that if you didn't, as an aspiring writer, it's going to be very hard to find a voice. It's just a lot about the work. It's a lot about staying at your desk, doing the rewrite, not being satisfied. And once you are satisfied, do it again. And that work ethic of the writer, I think, if you apply it, you will find your voice.
Amen.
I think it's a process that can take a lifetime. You know, I remember being a young writer, and so much of my early writing was so mimicking other writers, mimicking writers that I admired, mimicking writers whose books were on my bookshelf. And it took a very long time before I started to feel like it was my own voice. But there was a distinct feeling. I remember writing a story in college. I used to write mostly humorous things, which is really weird if anybody knows my work. But I used to write funny when I was in college. And then I wrote a story my senior year of college. And I was like, wait a minute, this just feels completely different. It felt authentic. It felt raw. It made me feel vulnerable. But the language itself just felt more organic. And I think that story changed everything, because everything that I've written from that point on, I've had that feeling that I'm being true to something that is not doesn't belong to somebody else that I'm simply sort of replicating or trying to replicate. And it's probably an amalgam. I think it's probably a variety of voices that have fed into, the way that I see and hear language, so it's the writers that I love, but it's not, it's an amalgam. And, I think we all are that. And those writers that I love were an amalgam of the writers that they loved. And, it's a communal process in a way, I think.
This is a very emotional topic for me because, I wrote my first novel, Fly Girl. I started writing it. It took me 25 years to get it finished and published. And all the time, every time I read it, I thought, well, this isn't good enough. This isn't me. This isn't who I want to be. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I write in a certain style, and I have to accept the fact that this is how I write, this is how I express myself, and there's nothing wrong with it. I can't constantly, say to myself, well, I want to write in a more lyrical, literary style. That's not what I'm writing. And while that might be what I read and what I enjoy reading, it's probably never anything I'm going to write. I'm going to write plot-focused, character-driven, fast-moving fiction. So, it was a real epiphany when I finally came to terms and accepted this is who you are as a writer, and do it the very, very, very best that you can.
Okay, there's a few more questions coming in. I apologize if we don't get to all the questions. I'm just trying to pick ones that maybe have a little bit more of a broad appeal because we are on a little bit of a clock. Marnie says we can go over, but I don't want to cause Marnie any more headaches than she probably already has this weekend. There is a question about getting books published. I don't know if that really has to do with what our panel is supposed to be about, but I know it is of great interest to probably the audience. So maybe if anyone wants to just throw out some witticisms and advice on finding a publisher. This was directed at you, Robin, so I'll let you go first.
It's a really interesting question. When Fly Girl was ready to be submitted, I said to myself, because I understand that the publishing process can be extremely long. It takes a long time to find an agent. Then you revise your manuscript. The agent sends the book out on submission. Maybe a publisher buys it, maybe they don't. And I gave myself a year to pitch Fly Girl to agents for a traditional publishing track. And there was interest, but I didn't sign with anyone. And I gave myself permission after that year to consider alternate publishing strategies. And I did end up with a hybrid publisher. And then after that experience, elected to stay with that publisher for my second book, and will more than likely do so for my third. So I guess what I would leave the person who answered this question with is there are so many different ways to put your book in print. The only thing I would suggest is make sure when you do, because your name's on it, that you have put forth the very best quality work you can. And you don't need a traditional publisher to do that.
I think I just echo what Joe said earlier, and that is, it made me think of a favorite Hemingway quote, and that is, there are no great writers, only great rewriters. Mm-hmm. And you can work on your book. At some point, a friend of mine who's an artist said, you have to step back. He's an artist, and said, at some point you step back and say, painting is done. And that is true. But don't hurry yourself. In terms of publishing, whatever route you decide to go, as Robin said, when you're done and you're going to put your name on it, just make sure you feel good about every word of it. And, there are things I change about this book right here that it comes out next week. And I say, oh, can I have one more shot? Well, they're not going to give me one more shot, but I feel really good about it. And, but I think that when Joe said literally rewriting things, he said thousands. And I'm going to say he's not exaggerating. So be patient. Put your very best work, and then stand by it.
I think too many aspiring writers worry about getting a publisher. It's about the book. Write a good book. They're so in a hurry to get to the marketplace. like somebody's going to steal their idea. Nobody's going to steal your idea. Hey, look at Michael Connelly. Bosch case. Write a good book, and you can think that the character or the concept or the possible franchise is going to get you published, but it won't. If you can't write at a professional level, you're done. I've never heard anybody in the publishing industry say they would read more than 25 pages before they closed the book. Most said 10 or 15. I had one reviewer said, if I read 2 bad pages about the weather, I'm done. So it is in large part about the writing itself. And too many aspiring writers don't write at a professional level. They just write. When I was writing IQ, it took me a year to write decent prose, just to write decent prose. You know, I'm reading Elements of Style and on writing well and that kind of stuff. It's hard. You know, it's another, writing long form narratives is a profession. You know, it's multiple skill sets learned over a long period of time. You need to invest the same way you would if you were going to be a chemical engineer. And, you know, I write on weekends is not going to cut it. It's just not. If you're going to be a writer, everything else goes to the side. No Pilates class, take care of your kids later. You write first. You can tell I don't have kids. But that would be my focus, the writing itself. And publishing is going to come way down the line, but you write a good book first.
I agree with everybody. And I also wanted to add that once you are in it and you've sold a book, it's important not to conflate publishing and writing. They're 2 totally different things. Writing is your art, it's your passion, it's something that you should be doing regardless of whether or not that book is going to be sold. And if it does sell, you cannot take anything that happens in this very, very sort of fickle industry as a commentary on your work. You know, I really believe that, you know, it's an industry with so many vagaries and it's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to be. Publishing is hard. And it's not for the thin-skinned. And so I think you have to find the joy and never forget the joy that comes with the actual making of the art, because that's what matters most.
I think if you don't define yourself as a writer, I am a writer, it's really hard to write a book, but then to write the second one. Because unless it's one of these big blockbuster deals, you're not going to make a living off one book. You have to write the second and the third, and the publisher has to believe you can do that. Because by the time you write your 4th book, about then you start to make money, because you're getting residuals from the royalties from the first 3 books. And then, okay, I can quit my day job. But that's very hard to do unless you define yourself as a writer. And that's all I have to say.
Another thing that you know, is something that I talk about with my students a lot is everybody's got this, you know, idea that they're going to write their one book, and you get a lot of beginning writers have tunnel vision because they're so focused on that single first novel, and it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the writer if you're thinking you've got this sort of one shot. And you know, and I mean, I'm guilty of this too, but I think the best approach that I've had in my writing life is to look at it, like Joe said, as a writing life. It's like a body of work. I'm going to have some books that are not as good as other books. I'm going to have books that, you know, are moving for some people and other people don't like, but it's the cumulative thing that you're leaving behind. And if you're a real writer, you want to make more than one novel. You want to make lots of novels and stories and poetry, and, you know, you won't be able to help yourself. And I think that it's important to not put all of your, sort of all those eggs in this one little basket. There's so much more to being a writer than writing that one book that, that you think you might have in you. It's an ongoing thing. It's a writing life, not writing 5 years or 4 years or whatever.
This panel just became personal for me. This is great. This is really helpful. My book came out 3.5 weeks ago, and I'm like, this is what all the hype was about?
I know that feeling.
Well, we're approaching the witching hour. What I thought maybe we could do is, I'm going to try and be a good, I made a promise that I had everyone cry. I thought we got close at one point, but that's okay. No, what I thought we would do to close out is maybe you could leave our audience, either with a word or an image or something, even if it's a sentence, just something for them to take away as they head back to their writing desks or as they head back to their reading chairs, in terms of, either hopeful advice or just something to hang on to. Sometimes a word does this, just a single word can do this too. I'll just turn it over to this wonderful panel. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Tammy, you've got the longest list. You go first. You got to handle it.
Well, I'm gonna use more than one word then. I always call them the P's. Passion is where you begin. Perseverance, and then patience. Those are the 3 things that you need, and you will not survive the writing life without them.
I would add to that, don't stop. Just don't stop.
Yeah.
You're going to want to stop. You're going to want to put it in the shredder. You're going to want to walk away and say, like I said to my publicist yesterday, I'm never doing this again. And then, of course, I woke up this morning, and started working on my 3rd book. Just don't stop.
There's no such thing as writer's block. All that means is that you got up from your desk. If you don't want writer's block, stay seated.
Yeah, sit, stay. Yeah, that's a good one. I use it on my dog and I use it on myself. Like Robin said, I think rule number 1 is you can't quit, and rule number 2 is you can't break rule number 1. I mean, and it shouldn't be something you want to do. If you really invest in this, here's what I would tell you as a writer, and I identify myself as a writer. Just in this last hour, having an opportunity for the first time in 90 days to sit down with people and almost talk about, I grew up on Star Trek. I thought it was going to be really cool when I got to Star Trek. Well, I've had enough of it. I don't want to talk over computers anymore. I want to be back with people. But just this opportunity now to sit down and talk to people about writing and to listen to other writers. I'm going to turn this computer over to my manuscript, and I'm going to dive in, because when you connect with other readers and writers, it just really feels great. So if you have that feeling right now that you'd love to get to your manuscript, follow your passion, go for it.
That was great. Thank you all. That was incredibly generous and incredibly thoughtful and thought-provoking. Really was a joy to be here and to hear all of your stories and your words of wisdom. We are ending right on time. I get a bonus for that, right, Marnie? I get a big bonus for that.
Thanks, Rich, too. Thank you.
Oh, gosh, my pleasure.
And congratulations on the book.
Yeah.
Well done, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. It was great.
Wonderful panel, you guys. Thank you for all that information. Really, really helpful. We got so many people on Facebook just saying thank you. So want to make sure that that people are really responding to all of your advice.
I started taking notes, and then I said to myself, oh my gosh, I really want to sit down and start writing again, because
there you go.
All of the organization with this has taken up a lot of time. And that was my next thought was, well, where do I find the time? And then my next thought was, we have an interactive workshop today with John Vorhaus where he's apparently going to help me figure that out. I'm like, yay. We thank you all so much for everything, Rich and Tammy and Robin and Neal and Joe. It was a great, great panel.
Thank you.
Come back with your next books, please.
I would like to just, one quick question. So because we got this question, Tammy, how do people find out where they can take your writing classes?
I teach at San Diego Writers Inc. And so that's sandiegowriters.org. I facilitate 4 ongoing reading critique groups. And then I sometimes teach some novel writing classes, and I haven't for a little while, but I'm there. And then I also teach for the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Those are all online. The ones at San Diego Writers Inc. we are Zooming right now, and we'll probably continue to for the foreseeable future. And the ones that I do for the Writers Center in Bethesda are done. They're not in real time. They're just, online lessons and feedback and that sort of stuff. So either of those places, I'm always there.
Anastasia, could I just say really quickly, I was in Tammy's writing group for the last 2 novels I wrote. A lot of writers don't like writer group, but I tell you, especially as an emerging writer, and San Diego Writers Inc. has great writing groups with Tammy and with Rich and a lot of others. But my last 2 novels, my writing group's fingerprints are all over them. And it's something that really works for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but if you're an emerging writer and you're looking to share your work at a level that you'll get a lot of comfort and great feedback, San Diego Writers Inc., they've got a half a dozen different writing groups. Sign up for one.
Great, thank you for that.
Agreed.
Wonderful.
Thank you guys. And San Diego Writers Inc. is one of our sponsors. So thank you. So unplanned commercial for San Diego Writers
But
Inc.
I think it's useful because if people are watching and they want to take the next step, that's part of what we want to do here is we're all about building community and letting people know what resources are here for them. Marnie and I remember when Marnie was first talking about starting this festival, that was one of the big things she wanted to do was just to make sure that people knew what was here. So thank you.
Yeah,
for that.
that's true. That's a really good point. It felt like I was going around to talking to different organizations and nobody knew about each other. So I forgot that. But yeah, just making aware, what we have. And I also want to just do a quick shout out. We want to keep this festival programming free and accessible to all, and we're 100% volunteer run organization. We rely solely upon sponsors and donors. So if you can afford, honestly, like a $5 donation, $10 donation, we would be so grateful. You'll find the link to make a tax deductible donation on our website, San Diego Writers Festival /donations. And you'll also find it in the link in the comment section. So